Meetings. So what are they? How do they work? Why do we have them? If you're not used to meetings, they might seem intimidating, lots of strange roles and procedures, but they're not really once you understand them. And it's important if, as your role, if you have to attend meetings, that you get the best out of them. You're able to get your point across and you're able to use them effectively. So let's have a look at how to have effective meetings. Why do we have meetings? Well, the first thing to say is at the time of recording, we're still in the coronavirus pandemic. So not many people are having traditional meetings. I've not been to a meeting for months. But in replacement of that, we have been doing lots of Zoom meetings. So lots of online meetings where you see people's faces on a screen rather than seeing them in a room. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to talk about traditional meetings in the hope that they come back soon. So why do people have meetings? Well, for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's a good way to share information with a group of people. You get them together and you can tell them all at the same time. You can also check progress. If your team has lots of different people working on lots of different things, you can just bring them together and check how's it going, how's our project moving along, are there any issues? Which brings us to another point of why you have meetings, to solve problems. So it's good to get people together, brainstorm, pull things apart and see if you can come up with solutions if there's any obstacles to what you're all trying to achieve. It's also good to resolve conflict. You can do a bit of conflict management, a bit of negotiation. If there seems to be problems within the team, you can bring them together for meetings and try and resolve it that way. And it's a good way, just team building. If you've got lots of people and they're involved in something, but they tend to go off and do their own thing, it can at times feel like they're working on their own. So to come together every so often, it's just good for the team that they get to see and meet and get to know everybody else that they're working alongside, even if they don't do it on a daily basis. How do meetings work? Well, most meetings will have what's called an agenda. An agenda is simply a list of things to be covered in the meeting. They'll also have what's called minutes. Minutes is simply a record of what was said and agreed at the meeting. Now then, we're talking about traditional meetings here. These things can vary. So I have been to meetings where instead of minutes, they've had action plans, but it's essentially the same thing. It's a record of what was said, and it's more importantly a record of what was agreed. The agenda and the minutes are often sent out before the meeting, so everyone has a chance to look at them. And you might also be invited to suggest things for the agenda prior to the meeting. Now, the typical roles you'll get at a meeting include a chair or a chairperson. That is the person in charge of the meeting. They chair the meeting, and it's their job to make sure that the agenda is followed and that it's kept on track and the meeting is effective and works properly and everyone's given a fair crack of the whip. You might get a vice chair who steps in if the chair can't make it. There can also be a secretary who's the sort of admin behind the scenes. They might type up the minutes. They might take the minutes on the day. They might do all the sort of administrative roles behind the scenes that make everything work. They might actually arrange and organise the meeting themselves. You might also get a treasurer. Treasurers are basically in charge of the cash, the money. So they'll do financial reports, etc. And then you go into the realms of everybody else, which come under the heading of subgroup representation. Now that's a fancy term, but all it really means is the other people in the meeting are representing themselves or a group or an interest or an issue. And they're there, they've been invited because they represent something important to the meeting. It might just be that they're team members, but that's fine. They're still important aspects of that meeting. Now the format of the meeting goes like this. Before the meeting, you're usually sent a copy of the agenda and the minutes, as I mentioned before. And then when you get to the meeting, usually the first thing that happens is there's introductions, there's welcome, there might even be tea and biscuits, you never know. But formally, we start the meeting with the minutes from the previous meeting. So the chair will ask if people agree them. So you will be expected, if you've been sent them, to have read them. And if you attended the previous meeting, you get the chance to say whether you agree with them, that they are a representation, a fair summary of what was discussed and agreed, or if you disagree with them. Most of the time people agree them. Then the chair will take you through the points on the agenda, giving time and space for everyone to discuss those thoroughly. By the time you get to the end, then it might have, if they've got time, something called AOB, which stands for any other business. And basically that is, does anyone want to raise something that isn't on the agenda, if there is time? Again, this might not be called that. Sometimes I've been at meetings where they've had what's called park-it boards, which is simply a board or a flip chart or a piece of paper where you can just write things down that if there is time at the end you'd like to discuss. So that's essentially the roles and the format of most meetings. But again, as I said earlier, it can be flexible. It can be changed around a bit, especially now as we're doing more and more of these things online, more online meetings. You find they tend to be a bit more relaxed. But it's important you understand how they work. Things to consider when organising a meeting. Essentially, there are three key things you need to think about if you've been given the job of organising the actual meeting. The first thing is, who are you going to invite? Now, it might be obvious. If it's a team meeting, then it's the team. But it might be less obvious if you're talking about an issue or something a bit more complex. So have put some thought into that. You want your meeting to be what's called inclusive. In other words, everybody who's affected or involved should get a chance to be represented. But equally, you want it to work, so you don't want hundreds of people necessarily at the meeting unless that's something specifically you've been asked to set up. Once you've worked out who to invite, the next thing is the venue, or where are you going to hold your meeting. And you need to consider, when you think about venues, things like cost, size, how many people come into your meeting, how many people have you got to literally get into a room. Location, is it accessible? If people are driving, can they park? If people are coming on public transport, is it close to the bus routes? Is it close to train stations, etc.? Is the building itself accessible for people with disabilities? Is there things like induction loop systems for people with hearing impairments so they can use their hearing aids? Just think about these things and the people you're inviting. These things you need to consider. Do you need extra equipment? Like, will you need projectors and screens and flip charts? Refreshments? Do you need coffee and tea to be laid on? Do you have to do this, or will the venue organise it? And again, if the venue is going to do these things, it generally gets more expensive. So what's your budget for these things? Other things you need to consider then, the last thing is date and time. When are you going to hold your meeting? And again, if it's a community meeting, you don't want to be holding it at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday because people will probably be at work. But if it's a work thing, then that might be a great time for it. But just think about the people you're inviting and what their routines are and how best your time and date fit in with all of that. So there's a lot of things to think about. Also, just if you are dealing with people coming from great distances, do you have to have a meeting? Could you do it remotely? Could you do it online? But if you are going to get them all together into a room, just think about where exactly you're going to book your venue. There's a lot of little local knowledge that can help you with that sometimes. Local knowledge can tell you, don't put it in that building or don't put it in this place. No one will come if you do it there. You better do it here at this time. So ask people involved who've been around for a bit longer than you, who've got a bit more experience, what their recommendations are. Dealing with personalities. Now then, people are wonderful, unique, endlessly surprising things, and in a meeting that can be a great thing or it can be a less than great thing. And when I say dealing with personalities, that doesn't mean you're trying to manipulate or control, mind control or anything like that. All we're trying to talk about is keeping the meeting on track so it does what it needs to do. Now then, there is a huge array of personality types that you could get at a meeting, and we haven't got time in this short video to go through them all, so I'm going to keep this very simple. The first thing to say is, whatever you do when you're dealing with the people at a meeting, it's important we treat everybody with respect. It's important we encourage everyone to be involved, because that really improves the effectiveness of our meeting. The second thing to say, if you're a bit concerned about this and you're new to meetings, is don't worry, because it's probably not going to be your problem. It will be the chair's problem. And this is why meetings need a good chair to keep a grip of the meeting and get through the agenda. So generally I'm going to talk about two things here, two or three things. Firstly, you can get big personalities or even aggressive personalities who will be quite larger than life, have their own agenda we talk about, and they can dominate a meeting if you're not careful. They can make other people feel intimidated, and it can make people who are less confident really reluctant to say anything because they're up against this big show, if you like, this big personality. So it's important that the chairs recognise that. Direct confrontation is rarely a good idea. Occasionally you have to do it, but more often than not, a bit of coaxing, a bit of flattery, a bit of kind of give and take is a better approach. But it's important, if someone is starting to really dominate the meeting, that the chair steps in and sort of says, thank you very much for that. That's a really important point, but we've got limited time, so I just want to open this up so if other people have anything they want to say. Something like that. Use your own words, but you need to give that meeting space to breathe. It's not just one man show or a one person show. At the other end of the scale, you might get passive people who do very little. Some people don't say a lot, but when it comes down to it, they've been thinking, they get involved and they'll say something at the crucial point. That's fine. We don't mind quiet people as long as they're involved. Other people though, and I've seen this, turn up for the buffet. They turn up to, eat the cake, eat the sandwiches, and then they go, and they're not really interested in the meeting. Now, it might be they just lack confidence, in which case we're going to try and open the door for that. We're going to give them a bit of space. We're going to coax them and try and encourage them to get involved. But if they genuinely don't want to say anything or get involved, you might have to ask yourself, why are they here? Is there somebody else who would better represent that group or that person? Or is there something we need to do to try and get them involved? Okay, so the last thing probably to say about personalities is to talk about emotion in general. Often if the discussion is quite heated, the emotion rises. It's a good thing for the chair to be able to bring that down a little bit. It's okay for people to have heated discussions, but within limits. We don't want it to kick off, as we say in Manchester. Okay, if you let these things escalate and escalate and escalate and then explode, it can be quite damaging to a team or to a group. People say things, they start to act irrationally, they start to get angry and aggressive, and you could watch your project or your team disintegrate before your eyes. So if you feel you can't slow this down and the tension's rising and you can't, for your best efforts, stop it, then stop the meeting. Just say, I think we need to stop this now, go away, and in a couple of days or a week's time or so, we'll come back and we'll try again. It's far better to stop the meeting than it is to stop the team or stop the project because everyone exploded. So there you have it, a lightning fast tour of effective meetings. I hope that was of interest to you. Again, during this coronavirus pandemic, I've not been to any traditional meetings for a long time. Most of them have been done online, on screens. But hopefully we will get back to normal at some point. And it's a good thing to know. It's a good thing to know how meetings work, what the roles are, what the procedures are, and how they can be effective. And it's important for you, if you're going to be involved in them, that you can go into these things and get what you need out of those meetings. You can solve problems, you can communicate with people, you can pick up information for yourself, all the things we said at the start. So hopefully you feel a bit better if you do have to go to a meeting and you're not used to them. Don't be intimidated. Most of the time everyone's really, really friendly and welcoming and interested in what you've got to say. So enjoy them. And sometimes there's really nice biscuits as well. So knock yourself out. So until next time, take care, stay safe, and goodbye.